Hi everyone, this is Batushki. Today I'm starting work on a new mod, and so I thought I'd take the opportunity to show you how I design mods and what I do to sort of plan them out and then actually make them. So what I first start with is a OneNote where I keep all of my design ideas. And the way I do this, I do the same thing for work and my personal projects as well, but anytime I have an idea, I put it at the top of my list. So you can see this is my current list here. I've got things in bold that I supposedly am working on, which is not really true. They're more just things that have occurred to me more recently. And every time an idea gets added to the list gets longer and it gets pushed down. And I think of this like sediment sinking to the bottom of a pond. Like eventually the things that you really like are going to float to the top and you're going to come back to those ideas again and again until they're finished. At the moment, my idea is to build a mod for ruins where when you go into the map the first time, ruins will spawn around the map and you'll be able to explore those ruins and harvest materials from them. And not just, stone and wood and that kind of thing, but also some treasure that will be useful as you build your town. I've put that as my top idea, and I have some bug fixes and different things in here as well. But what I'll do then is I'll go down below my sort of main idea list. I'll then start to flesh out each mod individually. So the ruins mod, I'll always start with a concept statement, just a 1 or 2 liner that kind of explains what is my vision for the mod. The second thing that I always do with mods is I do a proof of concept. If it's something that I know works, so a mechanic or a gameplay mechanic that I know I've used before and I know how it works, then I don't need to do this step. But usually my mods are slightly different than anything I've done before, so I have to think through, okay, what kind of challenges technically will I be facing here and what should I do to overcome those? So a proof of concept just means, here are the things I need to prove actually work before I go dive in and do a ton of work on this mod. So for this mod, I need a couple of things that I'm not 100% sure I can do. The first one is to spawn an object after the game has started that has a building zone. Tried this before. So think about it, the ruin, you don't want people walking through the ruins, right through the side of an old castle wall, for example. So you need a building zone around it. But actually, before the latest game version, this caused a crash when you would try to spawn an object that had a building part. If the player wasn't the one to place that object on the map, it would crash. So I did test that this morning, and I found that yes, I was able to spawn bushes and cubes and different things on the map. And they have building zones, so people walk around them, and it doesn't cause a crash anymore. So thankfully, somebody on the dev team has fixed that issue, or maybe I was doing it wrong before. I'm not sure, but it works now. The second thing is salvaging stuff from inside the ruins. So when you have a building zone around something, it means that workers who are gathering resources can't get inside to gather that resource. Workers will never gather a resource like berries or stone or trees in the vanilla game if it's behind a building zone, the blue lines, right? So those things have to have no building zone in order to work with the standard gathering behavior. So I thought I might need to create a new behavior tree, so like a new behavior for workers, so that they could walk through those blue lines. And I've done that before, but I hadn't done it for gathering things. So I actually think it might be easier if I just put the gatherable outside the building zone. So for example, if I have a castle ruin, instead of having the worker go inside the castle ruin to dismantle the castle or explore it, I'll just have the worker go to the very outside edge of the castle. And that way the thing that they're gathering, which is the salvageable material, will actually exist outside the building zone. So I did test that this morning and it works. I can create a ruin and put a gatherable outside the building zone, and they gather it with no issues. To do something with the visuals, so say again, back to my example, it's a big castle, a castle ruin. I want the salvage workers to remove parts of the castle until it's completely removed. I don't want them to be, hammering away at the castle and then suddenly the castle disappears. So I'm going to need to do a proof of concept on this. I'm pretty sure I can do this. I think I'll just build in Blender. When I build the 3D models, I'll build them in pieces. And every time a worker removes another piece, that piece will disappear until the entire thing is removed. This is going to be a little bit more complex than what I just explained because I need them to gather from the top of the ruin first, right? You don't want them, removing the bottom section of the castle and then the top is still floating in the air. So I will need to add a little bit of custom code to embed into the objects so that they remove them in the right order. But I don't think that's going to be an issue. I can use a thing called components, which is a way to sort of embed your own custom code into objects. So I think I can do that. And then of course I need to test that once the building is completely dismantled, that the building zone that used to surround the building is also removed. I'm pretty sure this will work because the building zone belongs to the object, and if the object is removed, the building zone should be removed, but it's worth testing so that I'm not disappointed if I build this huge mod and it turns out once they dismantle a castle, you still can't walk in that place where the castle was. So these are the things I do in a proof of concept. I try to find any of the possible sticking points and prove that they work before I do any modeling, because the 3D modeling and the iterations on testing and stuff, that's what takes all the time. Testing a few simple things like this mechanically is fairly straightforward, and it will save me a lot of work if it turns out that they don't work. Then I kind of list out the things that I want to do, the different types of ruins that I think would be fun, like an old tower. Here in Ireland, there's lots of old Norman towers. They were tower houses, and sometimes you'll find them in ruins in a field, and they're quite, they're simple. They're just rectangular towers, so I'm thinking of something like that. Obviously, a castle ruin would be incredible, some broken down towers, some walls, foundation stones, kind of jumbled rubble. That would be pretty cool. A manor, I'm thinking this will be like, a large farm complex, so maybe a couple of foundations from old houses, maybe a few random huts, that kind of thing, and there would of course be all kinds of potential treasures there that you could dig up. A Roman ruin would be nice that you could dismantle to use the polished stone or the marble, so it'd be an alternative source for marble instead of having to find that via a mining zone. And then just a village, so a very simple sort of thing like an old church that's broken down, maybe missing its roof and a couple walls, and some huts, just kind of ruined wooden huts, I think would be fun. A lot of this is more just, again, to give sort of visual interest to the maps. I don't want it to be a huge gameplay thing to explore the ruins, because it's not really that kind of game, right? It's not like an RPG type of game. It's a city builder, so you have to keep in mind that, you may have all these crazy ideas, but how is it actually going to work, right? People are going to go out and salvage stuff. There's not going to be this huge storyline around the ruins. I mean, I could invest some time in that, but at the moment I think I'll keep it within the parameters of how the game works today. I also outlined a little bit how I would need to spawn the items. So I've already started to do this in testing. First time that the mod is loaded, it spawns all the ruins. Of course, it's not that simple, right? You need to make sure they don't spawn in water. You need to make sure they don't spawn on a super steep mountainside where it wouldn't make sense to have a ruin. And I've some experience with this kind of thing from my security mod, because in the security mod, I have to spawn the outlaw camps, and the outlaw camps, can't be spawned in water. In fact, the outlaw camps, I also have to test that they're accessible from the village center, which I won't have to do here because, it's not mandatory that the ruins be accessible. It's just they need to be on land and they need to be somewhere relatively level. Also, I need to make sure they don't spawn too close to each other or too close to any existing building part in case the player adds this mod to the game after they've already built some buildings. I want to make sure I don't spawn ruins right on top of their existing buildings. For some larger ruins like a tower and stuff, I want to remove trees that might be nearby just to make sure that it looks right. You don't want to have a bunch of trees growing sort of halfway through a ruined wall. It might not look right because the trees move in the wind and it might look a little funny. So I might want to remove trees from some of the bigger models. Then I need my workplace. So I'm envisioning this to be pretty simple. It's going to be like a salvage yard. It'll have some workers and you'll paint an extraction zone and they'll go out and they'll extract resources from the ruins. Totally optional, because you could just leave the ruins alone, right, and just build around them. That would be pretty interesting too. But if you did want to salvage them for resources, or you didn't like where a ruin was and it was kind of obstructing your own plans for that area, you could go disassemble it piece by piece. And I wrote some details about how this would work. It's kind of technical, but basically that it would have to remove the pieces piece by piece like we talked about earlier. And finally, I always have this other category. Sometimes it's things that I want to expand on. Other times it's just other mods that have to be modified to work well with this one. I try to make sure that all my mods work well together. I have them all in a mod pack, and I like to play those mods together, and I've kind of actually built them to work together. So I often think about how to make sure that they work well. In this case, I'm thinking the player might want to burn down the ruins rather than go through the work of salvaging them, if they just want to clear the land. And it would be more realistic too if a fire starts in a forest and there happens to be a ruin in the forest. I would like to destroy the ruin at the same time and not burn down all the trees and still have this ruin sitting there. So I will make sure that the fire mod is allowed to burn these structures, because the fire mod only looks for certain types of structures. Building parts, for example, and trees and stumps and rubbish are the current ones that it will burn. So I'm going to make sure that these special objects that are spawned as ruins are burnable. So that's kind of how I do my planning. I kind of write it out, and a lot of times I'll write all this stuff down and I'll iterate on it over a few days, and then as I build it I realize I've either run into something I didn't foresee, or I'm realizing it's actually not that fun to play with, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a game, it's a simulation, so it needs to be fun. Some of the ideas I come up with are realistic, but they're not very fun. I will definitely edit and change this as I go, and I'll start checking off the stuff as I build it, and we'll see where it takes me. Just to give you some more insight into how my mod process works, I have so many mods designed in this Onenote. It's a huge Onenote. I don't know how many pages it runs to, but it must be 20 or 30 pages at least. I often start working on mods and don't ever complete them because I run into issues, technical issues, where I'm blocked and I need the devs to do something. Sometimes I run out of steam and I just, it's too big or unwieldy. Sometimes I work on it for a while and then I get a little fatigued and then I come back to it later and finish it. And the one you're looking at now, Advanced Needs, I'm working on with another modder, Minotaurus. This one is a little tricky because we're collaborating on it. It's the first time I've really collaborated with somebody on a mod, so it requires us to kind of share the code and all that kind of stuff. We've made a lot of progress on it, and I'm hoping to get back to working on this in a week or two. But this gives you an idea, of how long sometimes the dev list can be on a particular mod. There's a lot of stuff to do. Each one of these items could take me a couple days to do. It just depends, especially when it comes to 3D modeling. I spend a lot of time on that, and testing. Testing takes so much time with modding. I probably spend the majority of my time testing. I want to make sure it works well. I want to make sure it's fun to play, and so I end up usually, if I develop a few mods in a row, I'll go through and do a playthrough for a week just to make sure it works the way I think it should. Even then, I'll end up with lots of bugs, and the user community is great at reaching out to me and telling me when I've done something wrong or when something doesn't work, either through Discord or there's some commentary function on foundation.mod.io. Discord is better because I can have a dialogue there, but I get most of the comments on my mods from mod.io. I try to go through there and pick up bugs every once in a while to fix them. You can see I've got a couple of mods planned here which are what I call 2.0s, so they're just the next version of a mod that I made a long time ago. Authority was a mod that I made probably the first summer that I was modding, so I knew, some stuff. I didn't know any of the fancy stuff that I know now, so I'd like to go back and I'd like to rebuild that. I've done that with a couple of my mods. I've done it with security. I did it with the trading post. I've done it with street performers. So there's a few of the bigger mods that I've completely redone since I built them the first time. And I like doing that because after a while I realize kind of the weaknesses of a particular design, and I start to accumulate a list of stuff I want to change. And as soon as that list is big enough, then I try to tackle a complete rework of the mod. So we'll scroll on down here and see what else we've got. I had a mod idea for taxation. This was one where, from a realism perspective, it makes perfect sense. In the game, the way you make money now, the villagers go to a market and they buy food. And they're basically buying it from themselves, right? Because they raised it or produced the item in their own workshop, and then it gets put in a granary or a warehouse, sold at a market, and they pay for the same product that they produced, which I think is kind of weird. And there's no taxation per se. The only taxation there is that the king taxes you for building stuff, and he also taxes you for the land that you own. So I thought, it'd be great if the villagers just made stuff and raised food and all that stuff, and you taxed them or taxed their workplaces to get money. That way you'd have to send tax collectors around, which would be more realistic than just money appearing in the market. And it would kind of create this sense that there's a money supply. So I designed this whole thing, had this great idea. And basically at the end of it, I realized, this is not going to be very much different than the vanilla game works, and it's going to be a ton of work to make this. You're basically going to end up with the same money that you would end up with now. It'd be kind of nice because you'd have to set up your tax collector routes and all that kind of stuff. But I think I put this on a back burner for now because I basically realized it's not going to make much of a difference to the game. But you can see it's a huge design that would have to go through. So, in this case, basically I'm judging it and saying the level of effort required compared to the playability and fun that I would get from playing it, not really worth it at the moment. And you have to remember, I'm making mods for myself. When I started modding, I didn't even think about releasing the mods to other people. I actually started building them on my own to use for myself. I still think of it that way. Like, if I don't want to play with something, I'm not going to make it. If somebody asks me and says, hey, I want you to do this or that, if I don't think it would be fun for me, the way that I play and the way that I enjoy these kinds of simulation games, then I don't bother making it. Because if your passion isn't behind it, if you don't have some enjoyment from it, there's no point in spending all this time, because these are very time consuming, right? I hesitate to even say how many hours I'm spending on modding, but I bet I spend 15 to 20 hours a week on it. So if I'm going to spend what is basically a part-time job doing modding for free, then I should really enjoy it, right? It should be something that I'm passionate about. So I make sure any concept that I come up with that I don't really like, I'm gonna put it aside. This next one is interesting because this was inspired by playing another game called Kingdoms and Castles, which is a kind of a low poly city builder I played for a while. It's actually funny, if I think back to my history with Foundation, I don't really love playing video games. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a gamer in that way. I have a lot of stuff going on in life. I love the outdoors. I love nature. I'm outside as much as I can be, especially when the weather is good. So, time spent indoors, I kind of think of it like, man, I really should be outside doing something right now. And so I don't tend to play a ton of video games just to play them. Like, if I'm going to play a video game, usually it's to get an idea for a mod. And I've really never found another game that I was interested in modding except Foundation. I basically buy video games on Steam in order to test them to get concept ideas for mods for Foundation. And of course, if I ever found another game that I thought was as cool as Foundation, I would definitely try my hand at modding it. I remember I discovered The Sims 4 last year, and I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. I would love to mod this. And as soon as I started getting into the mods and stuff, I realized that game's been around for a while, and there's so many mods already built, and most of the things that I wanted to do had already been done. I will eventually find another game that I'm interested in modding. At the moment, it's Foundation. Probably will run out of ideas for Foundation at some point, or at least run out of interest. But I've surprised myself even now. I keep coming up with new ideas that take my interest in a different direction. So this one was inspired by that. In that game, basically, there's kind of more threats. You have Vikings that invade every once in a while. You have a dragon. The dragon mod that I built was actually inspired by Kingdoms and Castles as well. The idea is that, Vikings would show up on the border of your settlement, and they would try to burn and pillage, and you need to stop them by using walls and soldiers and guards. I had a very rudimentary concept working like this in my security mod. A bandit on a horse would come by, and if he could get into the middle of your town, or if he could access a workplace, he would steal things. I think he would also convert some of the villagers to become outlaws. But I ended up actually removing that from the mod, mostly for performance reasons, but it also was a little confusing the way that it worked. It wasn't clear exactly, what you needed to do to protect yourself. And it wasn't really that dramatic. I mean, the dude was trotting by on his horse, and he would sort of casually go by a workplace and stuff would get stolen. So it wasn't quite what I wanted. So I came up with this concept of having Vikings, which would require a ton of work because this really hasn't been done in Foundation. Like, Foundation doesn't have any kind of fighting. It doesn't have any kind of warfare other than sending your soldiers off to the horizon and them coming back with loot. And I think developers never really intended it to be that kind of a game. And honestly, the older I get, the less and less interested I am in, war and fighting and all that stuff. So I kind of think this one's probably never going to see the light of day. But it's a fun concept, and it would be really cool to have Vikings and Viking ships and guys and cool helmets and, all that kind of stuff. Dragons, I've already built this mod, but what I do is I leave room for future expansions. So I was thinking, it'd be cool. Currently the dragon flies around for a while and then he torches your town if he doesn't get gold or jewels. It's pretty basic. It could be a lot more full-fledged. You could have ballista firing at the dragon as an alternative to buying off the dragon. You could try to kill it. That would require some very interesting coding because I've never done like trajectory physics type stuff, so that would be kind of fun. You could have a dragon's cave where you could try to capture the dragon or destroy its cave so that it had nowhere to live and then it would go away. And then I also had this weird idea that would be kind of fun to have dragon riders. So you could actually capture a dragon's egg, raise the dragon and keep it tame, and then assign a villager to fly around on it and protect your village from other dragons using your tame one. That one may have some technical blockers because having the villager ride around on the dragon, not actually sure that would work. These are all interesting ideas, but I haven't got to the point where I'm like, yeah, I would love to do this. I mean, I just like watching the dragons fly around. So to me, it's almost more just a visual thing to have them in the game. And it kind of keeps you on your toes because if you don't keep your economy in good shape and you start to run out of gold, then the dragon torches 2 or 3 major buildings. I was just playing the game the other day during a playthrough test, and I forgot that the dragons would eventually come. It's kind of random, so sometimes you don't get many dragons and then all of a sudden there's a dragon, and my economy was completely in a shambles. I had no gold and no way of raising any, and I didn't get any events that could give me extra gold. The dragon ended up torching my entire Lord Manor complex, which I had just finished building. It was this huge complex. The entire thing burned down. And of course with the dragons, unlike with fires that start accidentally, you have very little chance of putting the fire out because the dragon's fire is so powerful. Kind of ticked off about that, but then I'm like, you know what, this is actually interesting because this is a story that happened in my village instead of me being in complete control of everything. The dragon came by and burned down my entire Lord Manor, so now I got to start over, and it set me back a couple of seasons. But it's just something to kind of add that little bit of detours as you develop your village. It's not just always the same thing each time. What else do I have in here? So I'll just scroll through some more of these. You can see I'm not even close to the bottom of my list. So some camera tools, waiting on some things to happen on the dev side for that. Clergy, there's no clergy in the game right now, which is really weird. I mean, clergy were an essential and huge class of people in medieval times. So I was really hoping I could get clergy to work. The way that I could get it to work right now wouldn't be very realistic, so I kind of tabled that one. I did a mod that I think is quite creative a year or so ago called Forest Folk. And basically people live in tree houses and all their workplaces are built in trees. So I had this idea that I could do that for other environments. So there'd be like water folk and stone or mountain folk, maybe, dwarves that live in caves or something like that. So I will eventually get back to this stuff because they would be fun. Road Builders is one that I actually got quite far on and never really liked how it worked. I was able to make these roads that basically are like the walls in the game. You can make them curvy or straight. They conform to the terrain, so they work really well. People do walk on top of them, so they look like a proper road. I just never liked how it worked. It was fiddly, and I don't like fiddly stuff. The walls in the game are a little bit fiddly because when you click on them, they're hard to join together. And with roads, you have to have intersections and stuff, and it was very difficult to get it to work right. So I did a ton of work on this and then just dropped it. Hopefully someday I'll get back to that one. Oh, lots and lots of other stuff. Pirates, wild folk. It's kind of a little bit like my Outlaws, but maybe, people living in little villages on their own. Planet Foundation. So Planet Foundation is a huge mod that I've redesigned twice. Started work on twice and really never got very far with it. It's basically a complete redo of Foundation, but in, space. And the concept is kind of fun, like instead of medieval times, you're landing on a planet and you've got a spaceship hovering in space and people beam down when there's room for them to live on the surface, and you could do all kinds of interesting stuff. I love sci-fi, so I have lots of ideas for this mod, but it's a tremendous amount of work because you're rebuilding everything from scratch. You know, every single building, every single prop has to be completely built from scratch, which if I do run out of stuff for the medieval game, I will come back to this and I'll work on it. To be honest, you know, I've tried to play a couple of space city builders. I've tried to play Surviving Mars. I'm trying to think. There's a couple more that I've tried, and I just never got into them. For me, visually, sci-fi is more interesting as a storyline to me. You know, colonizing a new world and the technology that's required. The way that the towns are laid out, you know, the technologies, they don't look as cool to me as medieval towns do. Medieval towns, there's just something about them that's just very human centric. It's rooted in the way that we live and work every day, or did live and work every day. And I still feel like that's deep in our psyche. Whereas, you know, some bubbles and some shiny towers and a few little shuttles running around, it just does not speak to me the way living outside, you know, living with dirt and chickens and pigs running around, like that just speaks to me a lot more than space. But at the same time, it's really fun to build little spaceships and stuff. So I may come back to this one. So that gives you an idea of how I plan my mods. I'm just gonna pop down to the bottom because I mentioned, you know, like stuff sinking to the bottom. All my earliest ideas, sometimes I'll get inspiration by going online and looking at 3D models. By the way, there was a church ruin, I think. That would be a great inspiration for my ruins mod. So you can see I've listed some stuff out there, and then I get, you know, inspiration from 3D kind of packs that you can download, like a complete log cabin reskin. I did do some log cabin buildings. I really love log cabin stuff. If you've ever played with Lincoln Logs, that was something I played with as a kid, and I love that concept of building everything out of logs. So yeah, so I get to the bottom of my list, you know, 30 pages later. So that should give you some idea of how I plan and design my mods. Next up, we're going to look at some of the tools that I use to build mods, and we'll start building the Ruins mod.